Hello, everyone. Welcome. So glad to have you with us. I'm absolutely thrilled to have Joanne Avison and Peter Bort with us today. And this is really thrilling for me because I've been on this pathway to health for so long. And when I say pathway, I mean, of course, it's all of personal interest to me. But I'm not talking about my personal health journey as much as my personal exploration. And I've dipped my toe into the fascia world a few years back, and I was very, very fortunate to hunt down Joanne. I had to really chase after her. She was in England, and there was very, very few people involved in the fascia world at that time. And so I was delighted to be able to connect with her eventually, finding her at her home in Brighton and chatting to her about all these subjects. And I would say that she's one of the world's expert on fascia, undoubtedly. And probably her book, Yoga, Fascia, Anatomy and Movement, is probably one of the finest works out there because it's very accessible. And what Joanne brings to the table, more than anyone else that is out there, is an artistic sensibility. And also she approaches it as well from the aspect of being trained in body work, in what we used to call Rolfing, I think is structural integration. But even more significant and interesting is that she worked with Tom Myers. Now, if you're got any awareness of the fascia world whatsoever, you'll be very familiar with his anatomy trains. He's really led the charge in the fascia world. And Joanne was studying with him when they were doing those initial dissections, finding these trains of fascia going throughout the whole body and making all of these linkages. And since that time, the fascia world has really exploded into new understandings. And Joanne's had a second edition of her book come out, which highly recommend. This program, this interview is not an ad for Joanne's book, or a promo at all, but I do feel it's really important to mention it, because if you really want to go deeper into that world, it's a great book and resource to have, particularly if you're involved in the healing arts or you're a movement or somatic teacher of any kind, yoga, whatever. I think you'll find this book absolutely fascinating. Joanne goes into the embryology, how we're built in a way, and perhaps she'll touch on that a little bit in our interview. I'm very happy as well to have Peter Bort with us. Peter is actually an attorney, and he has really rebuilt his health from the ground up, and using just, it intersects so beautifully with what we're dealing with Joanne as well. And this is why I'm thrilled to have them together. He's what could be called a mitochondriac. In fact, there's a great way. People who are just really into the vitality of the body. And our energy is generated from these little cells, organelles, whatever they're called in our cellular structure, called mitochondria. And that is our power source and we'll go more into detail about that. And so our vitality, a lot of that comes from the health and the well-being of our mitochondria. So we'll talk more about that. If you don't understand, we'll go into this. And this is for the lay person, so we're going to be talking in very ordinary terms. But above all, I want you to leave this session with some practical tools. So it's not just about theory, but things that you can actually do to bring up, to raise your level of vitality. So let's begin, though, by just creating the environment for us of light and love and sound. And the light aspect of it is that we can start attuning ourselves to these frequencies of light that are in and around us. And so we ask for the highest and purest light from the highest and purest source to surround and fill each one of us watching this and the space that we're in for the highest good. So that's the light. And then there's the love. And the love is just us connecting with the heart. We can put our hands over our heart center, or we can just think of someone we love more than anything, or just bring that loving energy forward and let it radiate out. It's always nice to touch the heart center because it seems that that kind of ignites this radiance of loving from us. But we can also have that image, who do we love? When we think of them, we light up. A child, a pet, something that kind of creates that smile in us. And then the sound is whatever we want to bring to it. This is sponsored by the Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, and we often chant the hue, the H-U, the hue, or the Anai hue, which are the sacred sounds. And these are attunements to God or to spirit. In fact, hue itself is a name for God in Sanskrit or Pali language. So these are, important sacred tones that we can utilize, or you may have your own mantra that you utilize, or you can hum. And so you can just gently hum to yourself. Or another way is just to take one of the vowels and just chant that, an A, an I, an O, an E, a U, oftentimes pronounced oo. And any of those things will create this vibratory resonance inside of us. So with the kind of the scene set with light and love and sound, I want to start with Peter Bort, because this is something where, sometimes we'll do something, and I was actually having a conversation beforehand. We had another little class earlier on, and we were talking about the movements that are involved in Qigong, for example. And this person said, well, I don't know if it's doing any good. I'm moving in these slow, doing small movements, and I don't know if I'm doing any good. And I think Peter really approached his health in a very, very scientific and intellectual way in many ways. So he has these practices, but then he did blood tests, and then he was able to track the improvements. So Peter, why don't you just give us a brief overview of your journey, and let's see how you came about all of this.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. And I'm always inspired to be under a tent with you and Joanne. You both have so much wisdom. And I was very much inspired by the example of my spiritual teacher, John Roger, and the way he approached learning. And he would just demonstrate to me over and over again, let me check that out. Let me see if it works. And I'm going to keep it quiet. I'm going to sit on it for at least 2 years before I share my experience with anybody. And I saw him demonstrate that many, many, many times. Since 36 years ago, when he found me, I found him. And so when I was reaching about 60 years age, I found my energy levels were lagging, and I had brain fog that I wasn't used to. I'd kind of lost my edge in terms of the work that I do in the world as a mediator. And I was really looking for something other than just, the latest supplement to take, or, the idea that if I wanted to lose weight, I would have to reduce the number of calories that I was taking in, and I would have to increase the number of calories I was burning off. Just like a very, that type of approach was not working for me. So being about 25 pounds overweight at the time, and having my blood work done every year, I kind of had a baseline from which to start. And I had, a lot of aches and pains and things that were not fun. And then I just kind of got curious about this approach to health that you could call quantum biology, you could call, being enthused about how the mitochondria in our body work. And the behaviors that are associated with following this approach to health are very much connected to nature. And they are very much inspired by nature and how, we are designed as humans. And so what happened is I did these practices for a number of months. I checked my blood levels for certain things again, and I was very, very happy to see that the indicators of inflammation in my body had gone down a lot. My sex hormone, testosterone, had come up really nicely, and that I had dropped 25 pounds of excess weight that I've kept off in the years since I turned 60. And my mental acuity improved. So this is more anecdotal. It's not a blood test, but I went from, I got to quit doing this work, to getting more enthused by my work. So that was my baseline. And the practices are very simple. And it's kind of like my approach was grab the low-hanging fruit. Don't sign up for something where I have to spend $1,000 a month. Don't sign up for something where I have to make trips to some office, 3 times a week. Just what's really simple, what's a low-hanging fruit. So the lowest hanging fruit was just to actually get out of my bed around the time of the sunrise, to go outside, to be connected to the earth if possible, which bare feet on the earth, and to have my eyes out in this early morning sunshine. And I can tell you that each time I do this, there is a wonderful feeling of well-being. It's not hard for me to get up. It's not hard for me to go out in this early sunlight, because it feels so good viscerally. And then what happens from that is the circadian rhythms, and we have many in our body, as well as ultradian rhythms. Ultradian rhythms are like connected to the seasons, and circadian to the span of a day. And these circadian rhythms are coming into balance. I'm noticing that I'm sleeping really well. So now here's another low-hanging fruit to grab for. If a person can improve their sleep, even if it's just incrementally, but for me, it improved hugely to where I'm sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night. Actually, in the longest days of the year, I probably only sleep around 7 hours, but in the winter, I might go 9 hours. And it's restful sleep. So prior to these practices, I was waking up 2, 3 in the morning, sometimes anxious, sometimes just like, what time is it? And how long have I been asleep? And just not a happy person. And and getting up to pee in the night. So one of the things about bringing the circadian rhythms into balance, I don't have to get up and pee in the middle of the night very often anymore. And I'm in my mid-60s, and my friends of my age are all talking about how they have to get up multiple times to pee at night. So the low-hanging fruit of that early morning sunshine, and then this feet on the ground, this grounding. And there's been quite a bit of buzz about, earthing and grounding. I would tell you for good reason. We're designed as a being to get free electrons from the earth. And there's this Schumann resonance that you probably heard talk of, which is the frequency that the earth actually resonates at, 7.83 megahertz or something like that. And the free electrons are coming up through my bare feet, and I'm getting energy from that. And I'm getting energy from sunlight on my skin. Here's another low-hanging fruit. I was never a big sunbather. If you ask my wife, she would say, he doesn't want to just go lay on a beach somewhere. He wants to be, in the rental car, going here, going there, following the docent and people around. He doesn't want to lay on the beach in the sun. Well, I can tell you, I've acquired a taste for it, and my body loves it. And as beings, we're designed to source a lot of our energy through our eyes and bare skin from the sun. So the earthing, grounding, the sunlight exposure, the light diet. So the early morning sunlight is one thing, but the other part of it, especially toward having good sleep, is not being under bright artificial light after the sun sets. So this is, and don't take my word for it, just try it and see how you feel. So I will start to feel sleepy, and I won't get hijacked by some, TV show or book or what have you, and stay up late. I will just be, hello, I'm so happy to get in my bed. And so this is all easy stuff to do, not expensive, doesn't cost you anything except being willing to forge new healthy habits. If you find from trying the things that they really have these effects that I'm describing, then it's like, okay, maybe I want to commit a little bit to some new habits if that's working. So, Paul, I hope that's what you were looking for a nutshell.
Yes, thank you so much, Peter. And as always, so inspirational. And already I think we've had some real keys that you've given us. And just so I know a lot of new listeners are here, but Peter has spoken at some of the classes we've been given. And this idea of getting up early and getting the morning sunlight really had an impact on a lot of people who hadn't really ever thought about that before. And they've gotten up and they've gone for walks around the block or wherever they've gone, or they've even stood in their garden and they've got their feet on the ground. And it's really been very, very helpful and impactful, including myself. I have to say, I get up earlier now and I take morning walks, which I never thought of before. And that is a sunlight exposure. So Peter's not advocating getting out in the midday sun and exposing yourself to a lot of sunlight, but just getting that morning sun as the sun rises, and then also the evening sun as well, which Peter didn't mention, but he has mentioned in the past that we're going for a walk as the sun is setting as well, and we're resetting our rhythms with that of nature, as Peter mentioned, and of course the sleep cycle is absolutely huge. This is really getting a lot of press in the last few years. I first became aware of it actually in the year 2000. I remember when I read a book about it, and at that point we were still on the 24/7. If you needed sleep, you were weak. There was something wrong with you. So therefore, the less sleep you had, the stronger you were, and if it was a sign of weakness that you needed sleep. And of course, now that's completely been reversed in so many ways, and it was basically a huge disservice to us, and creates a multitude of health problems from emotionally, mentally, and physically, lack of sleep. So that is critical, and people have difficulty going to sleep. And so Peter, in a sense, is giving us this multidimensional puzzle. Get grounded, get into the Earth's frequency, which people are reluctant to do. It's like, I want the spiritual frequency. Absolutely, have the spiritual frequency, but don't neglect the Earth frequency as well. Get that into your body and move with that. So absolutely a marvelous set. So we have, and also the lighter diet, things like that as well. We'll come back to Peter, of course, but I do want to have you hear from Joanne as well. And Joanne, what do you make of what Peter was saying? How does it align with your work on fascia? And speak to us a little bit about what your understanding of mitochondria is, and how our work with the fascial system can stimulate the mitochondria. Again, this source of energy that's available to us.
Oh my God, they're so intimately linked. It's hard to know where to start. First of all, I want to clarify that the most recent work into fascia and the fascial matrix is that it conducts light through our system. This is very profound and it matters hugely. So what that means is we now have the subtle measuring instruments that allow for much more subtle measures than previously. So what I mean by that is, for example, 15 years ago, to use an MRI scan, you could see to about, I think, if I remember rightly, 7 millimeters, 5 to 7 millimeters was about the fineness that could be seen. But now we have very specialized fMRI, we have very specialized measuring devices, and what we have are measuring devices that can be used on living tissue without invading it, without cutting it necessarily. And what that means is that it's been possible to measure biophotonic emissions within the tissue. And you remember we showed this a long time ago in IHOP, the picture, it was called Frog Face from Tufts University in 2011, where they could film a light print coming into the tissue of tadpoles, of frog spawn, and it very clearly animates where the nervous system is going to imprint the main sensory features, the eyes, the ears, the spine, and the tissues. And what they discovered in the work was that by interrupting that bioelectric light print or biophotonic light print, the animal was formed with 2 heads or 3 tails or an unusual number of legs. So there was deformation. So that immediately triggered the importance of light to living bodies, albeit animals. We know, for example, in plants that photosynthesis is essential for the growth of plants. But if you think of cellulose in a plant as being the fascia of the human matrix, what we're basically shifting towards is this very subtle understanding that we, let's not say photosynthesize, because it's not cellulose and it's not green, but I think Peter would agree with me that we nevertheless synthesize light, and it's so profound and so important as part of the essential communication system of the human body. So thinking about that gives us the segue into the fascia. The fascia is the structure of everything, and we self-assemble it. We don't, when someone's pregnant, they don't go into hospital and get eyes put in or tubes inserted or limb bolt-on procedures. We self-assemble, we self-organize, we self-animate and self-develop using this living tissue animated by this life force that includes, but possibly isn't limited to, light. But because we form it in multi-dimensional, 361 degrees of beingness with light, it's under tension, which gives it resonance immediately. And this starts at the cellular level. This starts within a cell. So this is the organelles to the cell. And the mitochondria, as you said, are among those organelles. And the moment of conception, that original cell that is us multiplies into 2, then 4, then 8. That third division of the embryo is the basic seed of life image. And then we go on to form a cell made of cells that we then fold and enfold into eventually us. So Jaap van der Waal says we begin as a unicellular being and we become various levels of complication of a multicellular being. But always, 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 every single cell, every one of your trillions of cells is a mini me. They become specialized due to their shape and their location, but they begin as one. Every single cell can do all the same things, and that includes communicate, hold light, vibrate so that they can communicate with other cells, integrate, they can digest, they can excrete, they can contract, they can conduct electricity, they are electromagnetically sensitive, they can hydrate, they can dehydrate, they can all do everything. And then what happens is we have this process of specialization and spatialization. And the energy of that process, where things are and what they do, orchestrated as a whole, is energized by the mitochondria within every one of those cells. I think that kind of says it. Peter's nodding wisely. So they are so intimately related, you can't even separate them. And please remember, the majority of your tissues are made up of water, but not liquid water like I've got in this glass here, bound water. And what binds it is basically protein. And that protein binding process is completely held together, communicated, managed, integrated by the battery cells, the powerhouses of each cell, which is the mitochondria. So it's essential, but it's part of an orchestra.
Well, thank you so much for that. And you were just kind of segueing beautifully into this idea of part of the title of this program was the fourth phase of water. And I put that in because I thought it could be intriguing for people, the fourth phase of water. So just to kind of summarize here a little bit, we've got water, liquid water, right? We know when liquid moves around our bodies. We know liquid, that's what, when we turn on the tap, that's liquid water. Then we also know ice. Water suddenly becomes solid. We know ice, solid water. And we also know that water evaporates. So we have water as a gaseous. So those are the things that we normally look at with water. But this idea of the fourth phase of bound water, the best way to see that is in jelly. If you have jelly, it's just like, it's difficult to know. It's kind of, it's not ice, right? It's not hard as ice. It's not as liquidy as liquidy. So it's kind of got this way in between. Although that's not the perfect analogy, it's a pretty good one. And it also helps when we think of the body because we don't have water sloshing around our system. So water has to move in different ways. And this brings us to two very, very important parts. By the way, some water does slosh. Like if I have a glass of water, it sloshes around in my stomach for a little while. And also the urine will slosh around in the bladder. So it's kind of contained, but when in my arms, it's not sloshing around, or in my tissues, it's moving. But those parts need to be hydrated. So how does the water, the liquid, the hydration get into the cells, which is so very vital for our health? So thank you for that great explanation, and we'll go deeper into this. But the thing that I want to get on the table, again, just as a way of discovery here, you've mentioned this. The ability of the fascia to conduct light, which of course is a very important factor in all of this. But the thing that we tend to neglect is the idea that the body is an electromagnetic system. And I want to get into this with you because I think this is the thing that we just don't see. By the way, Joanne, I just posted on the chat room for the live stream the Michael Levin piece entitled "The Electrical Blueprint That Orchestrates Life." And this was a kind of a TED Talk thing. It was during COVID, so it wasn't quite the TED Talk with the audience. But absolutely extraordinary piece. I think it's pretty accessible. If you're interested in this field at all, you must look at it. And Joanne mentioned the electric frog face, which you can Google electric frog face, but that says pretty much the same thing, is that the electrical blueprint comes before the tissue forms. So it's almost like, well, it's not almost like, it's just like there's an electrical blueprint. And if we interfere with the electrical blueprint, the electrical aspect, then the body becomes malformed. And they show this using worms and things like that. So absolutely mind-blowingly interesting. Really, it's jaw-dropping because it's a whole nother way of looking at health and well-being. And I want to jump into this, first of all, with a question for Peter from Stacy, who's saying that in the UK, they're a little bit bereft of sun, not quite the same as we are in California here. So that morning walk, is it enough to get light, or does it have to be sun's rays?
Yeah, so I mean, we all imagine we've got, the beach in Venice, and there's a gorgeous, disk of the sun setting over the ocean, where we're in, Maine, and there's a gorgeous disk of the sun rising out of the ocean. Hey, that's nice if you can get it. As humans, we're just designed that the sun has different spectra of vibratory frequencies. And so first thing in the morning at sunrise, there's a lot of red. And so that's signaling through our suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's giving information into the the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and then, of course, all these chemical signals are going out to the body. So the short answer is any sun outdoors. So that, even if you just open your back screen door, or throw open your window and you're locked in, high rise. But that sunlight in your naked eyes and on your naked skin is what is signaling. And so that's that question. But I'm inspired to say something, in terms of what Joanne mentioned about the way that the fascia are taking in light and messaging light, at the speed of light through the body. So when I went to biology class, it was all about hormones and chemical messaging, and how long does it take this little endocrine piece to make the chemical? How long does it take to go through the bloodstream to get over to this organ? That's not instantaneous. That's not at the speed of light. So we've got, when we realize that the fascia is really a secondary nervous system, and maybe it's the primary one, but we'll take secondary, right? But if it is that important in messaging all throughout the body, and if we know, as Joanne has told us, in her book, there's a lot of things that are fascia that we don't consider fascia, like bone is fascia, so it's not just some stringy thing you pull out of your chicken, that you don't want to eat. That's the fascia. It's all these things, and I'll let Joanne go on about that, but it's doing a lot, the fascia, and the light messages on the fascia into the fascia are really important. So I'll take it one step further. We've got chemical messaging, we've got light messaging. So you travel at the speed of chemicals through the blood, you travel at the speed of light through the fascia. Well, how about this for those of us that are into subtle energy and intention? Okay, let's take the example of quantum entanglement, because in quantum entanglement, once two electrons have been in relationship to one another, if you take the one electron, you keep it here, you move that other electron to the outer edge of this universe, forget the galaxy, the universe. When you do something to that entangled electron here, instantaneously, it resonates out on the outer edge of the universe. That's faster than the speed of light. That's quantum entanglement. It's what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. And I would submit to you that's what John Roger was teaching us to do with our light, with our intention, what John Morton does with us all the time, what Paul does in these classes is say, tune into this light. This light is instantaneous. This light is everywhere. This light doesn't have the same kind of limits that a chemical message or even something going through bound water has.
Well, thank you so much for that, Peter. And just absolutely fascinating stuff, because I want to go a little bit more into this idea of fascia, not only conducting light, also, though, conducting this electricity, because I don't think we see the body in electrical terms. So can you speak to that a little bit, Joanne, to us about this idea of piezoelectricity, or the way that the fascia communicates perhaps through electricity or through electromagnetic, and what that can mean to us? And again, we may come around back to the hydration, because I think without hydration, without correct hydration, I don't think the electricity has a medium to conduct itself through. But right. Just speak to us about that, please.
Well, when we're working with frequency-specific microcurrent, and I share this with you because what's been discovered, as I've mentioned, is that we're working with millionths of an amp. We're not working with amps. When you work with a tens machine, probably everybody's heard of a tens machine. What a tens machine does is it puts amps through the body, which scramble pain signals. So the idea of that is you have an impulse going from neuron to neuron that's a pain impulse, and the TENS machine interrupts that and scrambles it. So it doesn't actually remove the pain so much. It distorts the experience of it, so anguish isn't experienced. So pregnant women, for example, they often give you a TENS machine it's not really easing pain so much as scrambling the anguish of the experience. It's not that you're not feeling it. When we're working with microcurrent, we're working with millionths of an amp. And I've had the experience many times, I mean, daily in my practice, of working where there is scar tissue, for example, and we get exactly the right current of that particular scar tissue. And I'm talking microcurrents. I'm talking tens of millionths of an amp. And it's inconceivable. It's so small. And what you actually feel is you feel the tissue redistribute. And what you're actually feeling is the electromagnetic shift of balance and hydration. But what we've got to remember is that the structure of water, we are 60 to 80% water as adults, bound. And it is the structure of that water and its responsiveness to electromagnetic field that gives it its structure. They can't be separated. So we think of electricity as if it's something that we add to the body or something that goes through the body because we know what it is. When you stick your finger in a plug and you get an electric shock, it's too much for you. What that is the nature of the current or the power of the current. But you are an electromagnetic field walking around, and the behavior of water, the structure of water, is bound by that electromagnetic organization. So, for example, every strand of tropocollagen, which is baby collagen, or collagen, which is fascia is collagen, it's a protein. Every single strand of it is electromagnetically charged. It has a positive and a negative end, if you will. And it binds with two others to form a triple helix, which then binds with two others to form a strand that's a triple helix. And to comment on what Peter just said, absolutely it's the primary tissue because it forms the nervous system. The nervous system is built by the fascia. So the nerve tubes called dura is a type of fascia. The circulatory vessels called tunicae, type of fascia. The tubes of the bones have hydroxyapatite in them, which is a starch, type of fascia. The muscles have myoprotein in them and they form tubes, which is muscle fiber. These are all different, they're called different types of collagen. But basically, they're all fascia with a different chemical balance, but also a slightly different structure. And we can experience that as texture. So when you talk about bound water pool, the easiest way to show that is to just run your hands over one hand over the back of another, and you can feel the skin gliding quite easily on the surface underneath it. And that is bound water. It's a bit like egg white. But the actual binding, the bound nature of it responds to the electromagnetic light field moving through it. So if any of those are somehow damaged, the light can't get through, or the light is disorganized, or the current is causing you know how light poles of a magnet, they can't come together. All these distortions all have a massive impact through the body. And what Peter is describing as a practice where you get those light rays on the body, so its response to light is being animated, and this is key, within a particular cyclic rhythm. It gives you the tempo of the natural system and its self-healing mechanism. It has a circadian and an ultradian rhythm behind it. So the problem we have is we try and separate these things into different parts, like watch parts, and then we write books about them. And it's a bit like me handing you the parts of a watch and saying, here you are, Paul, here's all the parts of the watch. There's the hands and the cogs and the wheels and the screws and the face and the rim and the back and the strap. They're all here. And here's a beautiful manual of how to put them together. And I hand them to you and I say to you, off you go, my darling. In no time at all, you'll be able to tell the time. You are literally a quantum lifetime or three away from telling the time from that pile of parts. And we are only just, with our recognition of fascia and mitochondria and microscopes, tiny, tiny microscopes, beginning to recognize there is nothing in your body that isn't charged. you are an electric body walking around. Nothing in you isn't charged. The water is charged. The fiber is charged. Everything is electromagnetically charged. And that's how muscles contract.
Well, this is, marvelous, and I'm so glad that you're saying that. And we have someone who's online with us who's suffering, and I think that I can use the word suffering, from long COVID, and was is online with us, really looking for solutions, really lying in bed, finding themselves highly fatigued and all of that. And none of us here are medical doctors, so we're unable to diagnose anything. But what we can do, though, is kind of just look at perhaps this person will want to look into this area of hydration, or this idea of just finding a way to recharge herself and really get those electrical signals really firing again, which is what Peter did. I want to refer to you to a book. I mentioned Joanne's book earlier on, and still highly recommend that book, of course. But here's a book, and I don't know if it may look upside down. I don't know. Because it's a mirror thing. It's called Quench. Are you? Yes, Peter's aware of that. I don't think Joanne is, perhaps. I'll read it to you. It's called Quench. Erica Rotella, who may be listening here, so thank you, Erica, turned me on to this book. It says, Quench, beat fatigue, drop weight, and heal your body through the new science of optimum hydration. And it's by Dana Cohen, MD, and Gina Bria. And what's interesting about this is the first book that really says, forget it. It says 8 glasses a day is not the way. And they really recognize this idea of bound water and hydration. And we'll get to a key point of hydration in a moment. But Joanne will like this immediately, because they quote Dr. May Won Ho. And I mean, unfortunately, she passed away, but Joanne is a big fan of Dr. May Won Ho and quotes her a lot in her book. So here's the quote from Quench, though. Dr. May Won Ho, a biophysicist and nanoparticle scientist who founded the Institute for Science and Society in London, pointed out that nanotubes, which exist inside fascia's microscopic water crystals, are aligned by collagen fibers. This combination, she posits, fulfills all the criteria for superconduction. Her take is that though we don't know the exact mechanism for how the gel water creates electricity, superconducting is occurring inside each of us all the time, which is basically what Joanne just told us. This accelerated information service to and from our cells charges itself through, and this is where Joanne's going to come in and jump in, through simple movement. And so, Joanne, so this is something where up to now you may be a bit lost or something like that, or you may be feeling fatigued, or you're looking for your health having a boost. And here we're saying, okay, there's this opportunity to hydrate yourself in different ways than you've looked at it. And one way to get into this bound water and to charge this bound water is exactly what Peter was telling us, which is sunlight. And that early morning sunlight is actually charging that hydration. And again, I had another question come in. Is this like, well, what if there's cloud cover? So just once again, it's just getting the light. If, as Peter says, if you can see the sunrise in the morning and that red sun at night, fantastic, good for you. If you can't, don't worry about it. The morning light itself will contain enough to charge up your system. So don't worry about the amount of sun, although that's nice. So Joanne, can you please comment about how to get this electrical information to and from our cells? It charges itself through simple movement.
Just to say, with regard to long COVID, my colleague, who some of you have met, John Sharkey, has done a great deal of work with COVID and long COVID. In fact, I believe he's just written a paper on it, Paul, so I will send that to you after the program. One of the things that we know about COVID, or what is being investigated at the moment, is that it does have a relationship with the fascia, which is what that sense of body-wide fatigue is about. So the fascia is working really hard to try and manage the disease, and the sense that long COVID, and this is very new science, so I'm just putting out the possibility that long COVID is closely related to the deep fascial system, and keeping hydrated and keeping moving in a subtle way is key. Now, deeper reading of Mae Wan Ho's work, and chapter 7 in my second edition, where I drew from John Roger and quoted him, she talks about the interface between the cells. So what she's talking about is the binding nature, the gap between the cells. So if you imagine a bag full of balls, so that one is the membrane of the organ and one is the membrane of each cell, where those membranes meet is where the activity takes place, where the dance takes place, where the interface is. And this is not interfascial, this is interfacial. So one interface to another. And what we know about gentle movement, and I'm talking about the work with someone like Sue Hitzman's melt balls, or Jill Miller's work, where we're using really soft Pilates balls to roll over the skin and rolling around on the ground that we would do as children, playful, what Peter was talking about. But if you can, I remember when we were kids, we used to roll ourselves down little hills and see who could roll the furthest. I mean, you have got no idea how powerful that is. Because if you think about a coral sponge, for example, it dries up. If you put it in a bath, it will sit on the bath for some time. It will sit on a bowl of water. But if you gently, gently squeeze and release and squeeze and release and squeeze and release, what happens is it starts to absorb water and let the water go. And then eventually the whole sponge becomes hydrated. So you've moved the fluid through it, but you've allowed the fluid distribution to be subtly and evenly organized through the tissue. That is partly done by the charge. That is partly done by the subtle, simple movements, just literally circling wrists, circling shoulders, rolling around on the ground. If you were in your bed, lovely yawning stretches and rolling over one way to the other side of the bed and rolling back to the other. These are really simple things that just massage this subtle interfacial relationship between things, allowing the body to refresh and renew. And may I just add, there is some research looking to show, and I'm not making any comments about what's right and wrong, please don't judge this, but it appears that the vaccines are sometimes very efficient in assisting long COVID. Sometimes people have contracted COVID, they are experiencing long COVID, and there is some evidence coming together that John Sharkey was talking to me about recently. There's a possibility that having the vaccine can assist with relieving long COVID symptoms. I'm just putting that out there to Stacey as a thought. It's not a judgment or a guidance. It's just an awareness.
So thank you for that. And again, though, that we're talking about whatever health system that we're dealing with, that this idea of hydrating our body and getting sunlight and moving our body and getting enough sleep, these very simple practices can really go an enormous way to assisting us and having a dietary intervention too. And we know that there's just so much to this because each of us are unique. And that's why there's no one solution for everybody. But there are simple things that we can do. So Joanne, could you take us through, like in 2 or 3 minutes or so, just some of us are slumped on our couches, some of us are in chairs, just wherever we are, just so that there's no excuse not to move. Just some simple movements that all of us can do wherever we are right now to hydrate our fascia, because this idea that there's one, we all form from one cell, and that's it. So that basically means that we're really one being, so everything is connected to everything else. So can you tell us?
Yeah, I'd love to. The first thing I want to show you is if you do something very, very gentle and simple, and I please, Paul, ask Peter when I finished about the eyes, because this is so important, and wearing different color lenses. I'm wearing one at the moment, but the different color lenses for the different machines, because I personally think Peter's done some fabulous work on it, where not just getting up with the morning light, but how do we deal with the fact we're only here because we're dealing with, right now I'm dealing with electric light behind me and to see the screen. So just to put aside, please ask Peter about that. But I want to start with the eyes. I want to give you a chance. We've talked in a lot of our harmonic self programs about the fascia tuning pegs, that there are specific sites in the body where the fascia can tune different areas. Now, we talk about particularly the base of the skull, at the back of the neck, either side of center. There's a really, really super space where the rectus capitis posterior minor muscles, they're about the size of a thumbnail. But in order to feel them, I want to show you something. Do this very gently. If all of you look up with your eyes, look up with your eyes, up as high as you can, really look up hard. So you can really feel your eyeball pulling up. And then Brigitte, leaving your eye up there, just begin to bring your chin down towards your chest. It should stop you doing that. You should feel very clearly that movement of holding your eyes up is stopped when you pull your chin down. Don't try and do it beyond that. Oh my God. And what that tells you straight away is that your eyeballs are the channel of them forming is crosses over. It's called a chiasma in the middle, where it crosses, and the muscles are right in this place at the base of the skull. And when you try and do that, you feel immediately how connected everything is. And what that does is it very rapidly wakes us up to our internal volume that we can't see, but we can feel. And one of the things that is really super helpful for you when you're at any time of day or night is a yawning stretch. And what that does is this simultaneous acceleration and deceleration of tissues, which we call a myofascial reset. And there's a paper that I'll write in the chat for you by Bertolucci about pandiculation, which is yawning. And basically what that's doing to the whole body is the coral sponge thing that I said, that squeezes out water and draws water in until it's all balanced. So what I'm going to invite you to do is yawn, and Paul, yawn as well. You'll set everybody off that's watching you. And open your hands and your toes and your heels and the heels of your hands, and just reach into a position, whatever it is, and yawn. And release, and twist your torso and find a completely different one with just the elbows first, and one arm down, one arm up, and then you might change that. But again, yawning, it's catching, you can make yourself do it. But what's actually happening is the quality of the movement is a squeeze release, but it's body wide. So Stacey, really, really gently and carefully and lovingly just think to yourself, I'm just going to squeeze this. So I'm helping my tissues get rid of what they don't need. They know what that is, and bring in what they do need. They know what that is. And you may find yourself with some very subtle food cravings, fluid cravings. Electrolyte solution first thing in the morning will really help you if you can't get out into the light because you're too fatigued. But you will find it extremely helpful. As Peter says, if all you can do is open the window and look into the light and do some really gentle yawning stretches, when you see that light, and have yourself do that, if only twice a day at sunset and sunrise, and you will begin to restore your original human circadian rhythm.
Thank you, Joanne. I mean, it's exactly what we're looking for, just those kind of simple things, because people can be wherever they are, right? They can be slumped back like this, but everybody can kind of start to do that, yawning and pushing. And this is really kind of
it's gentle, beautiful. Yeah. You can listen, how many of us get out of bed and the alarm goes off and you press the snooze? Tell me there's anybody here that hasn't pressed their snooze button for 7 minutes in the last 2 weeks. I mean, I know Peter doesn't because he's up and out in the sun, but you press your snooze button. Spend 2 of those snooze minutes yawning stretches in all directions, rolling. Talk to your body, just like tell me what do you want, and get it almost. It's incredible what you can do to retune. Don't go mad. There's no need to go mad. There's just spending some time kind of ironing yourself from the inside. Does that make sense? It's so simple, so natural.
Absolutely. And also, if some of you are just still wondering about this bound water or something that's called easy water, I've just posted to the chat room online, the live stream chat room, a TED talk by Dr. Gerald Pollack, who has been at the forefront of this idea of water and hydration, called Water, Cells, and Life. Highly, highly recommended. It's in the chat room. There's something for you to go to afterwards and check out if that again interests you. So it explains things in very clear detail, and I think you'll be very inspired by it. I know that Peter's seen that talk quite a few times, and Joanne's talked about Gerald Pollack so many times. But I want to have everybody kind of get this clear idea that hydration is important. Movement is really important for hydration. And of course, we need to take liquid into our bodies. But it's also a question of like getting that hydration into our cells. And that's when movement comes in, and those kind of yawning movements, those pandiculation movements, so vital for that. And that ability for us to conduct that electricity through our body and have this mitochondria kind of give the cell the energy that it needs and have that electricity go through our body is, to me, one of the huge keys to vitality, and is very much overlooked, this electrical magnetic system. So Peter, come back to us here, and we've covered some wonderful ground. What are your thoughts so far? What do you think that people would need to know, before they leave us?
Yeah, so I wanted to first of all address the there's a direct current DC electric current going through the body. Mei-Wan Ho identified what she was saying. Look, we've never been able to explain how the meridians of acupuncture, Chinese medicine has worked with these meridians, and if, like me, you get acupuncture, it works. They've been doing it over 5,000 years, and yet no one can say, well, in terms of anatomy, here's where the channel runs, on the Western side of research. And she said, it's real simple. It's running through the fascia. The fascia have this property of conducting that energy. So I also want to talk about, we want to be good to our hearts, for many reasons. And our hearts have a 22-foot electric field around them. That's pretty big. And the heart tissue itself is incredibly dense with mitochondria. So mitochondria are little things inside of your cells. You have 37 million cells in your human body, and each of those cells, not each, but most of those cells have organelles, mitochondria in them that can be in the thousands per cell. So think of them like batteries, and think of the easy water having a battery effect. Think of the mitochondria mechanism, the easy water mechanism, working like a battery. And so it's something we want to do. We want to have healthy, long-lived batteries. We don't, if we had an iPhone, we wouldn't do things to the iPhone that we knew were going to cut its life down. We wouldn't do that on purpose. And yet there are some unaware things we're doing with our bodies that are really taking a toll on the batteries of our body that are producing all this electric current. So, and Joanne had mentioned about the eyes, and it's an interesting fact that the disease macular degeneration did not exist at all medically until humans started exposing themselves to artificial light in their homes after sunset, and living this life that's out of alignment with the sun tempo. So, but to protect our eyes, because let's face it, we're going to be in all kinds of situations. To protect our eyes, there are different, people have probably heard of blue blockers or computer glasses or gamer glasses. And really the idea is to have a spectrum of light blocked at any given time. So if the sun's spectra are constantly changing all throughout the day, the blue blocker thing is not going to be one size fits all, meaning the blue blockers that are yellow that protect my eyes from these very bright computer screens and from indoor lights if I were in an office building, or narrow spectrum LED lights, those are not the same blue blockers that I would wear after the sun sets. So after the sun sets, I'm going to wear a darker amber color blue blocker. And the reason I'm doing that is to protect my eyes. The eyes actually, on a chemical basis, which I'm not going to go into at all because it's really a deep dive, but on a chemical basis, that very narrow, what's called blue light at the wrong time of day from the LED, from the fluorescent, is actually damaging eye tissue that could have a much healthier, longer life, and damaging an eye that doesn't have to have macular degeneration. So those were and the hydration, one very simple, Paul's all about the practical application. So here's something I shifted that overnight, changed the hydration of my body. I used to not drink much water or fluid during my workday. So that meant I was coming home after 5, 6, 7 at night, but I was hungry. So the first thing I was taking in was not liquid, not water, it was food. But then I was still thirsty. So then now I've got all this food in my tummy that wants the enzymes and acid of digestion, doesn't want to be all diluted with this water that I'm craving to drink. And now I'm trying to pound water all the way up to the time when I'm going to sleep. And I've got to have a glass of water by my bed because I might wake up thirsty. And this totally defeats, for me, how to hydrate. For me, how to hydrate is that before my morning meal, hydrate all I want. After my morning meal, wait at least an hour, let the digestive process do its thing, and then gradually, sip all through to the next meal, give it that time for digestion, sip, and then I don't consume liquids after dinner anymore. I'm not thirsty, and I definitely don't ever get hungry for a snack after dinner. And guess what? I don't have to get up in the middle of the night and pee because I've hydrated everything throughout the day.
Well, that's fantastic, Peter. So thank you. That's so interesting. By the way, people were asking me what is easy water, and it's EZ, the letter E and Z, and it means exclusion zone, or it's sometimes called structured water. So if you want a little bit more explanation on that, it's a little complicated to go into here. But if you go to that Gerald Pollack piece that I highlighted, I think you'll find that it explains it very, very clearly there as well. And so that's what we have there. So thank you for that explanation on this, the glasses and the blue blockers and the way that we can kind of help our eyes exclude some of those negative influences of some of the light that's on us. So there are techniques, and there's all kinds of different glasses that we can do. And I noticed that John Beaulieu, who I'm a big fan of from Biosonics, said that this month he's coming out with special colored glass gel kind of lenses in a way. So something I'm going to be keeping my eye on and be letting everybody know about. So Joanne, anything more on the eye situation?
I just had something I was going to say then. Yes, I just wanted to say, just to give people a little bit of an understanding of this EZ water, I just want to give you a little story of my experience when I met Gerald Pollack. What he discovered was that in a glass of water like this, there are two types of water. The top, we think of water as having surface tension on the top, that if I had a little feather, I could drop it in this glass and it would float on the top because there's surface tension. But what he's discovered is that the top third of this water is actually a different structure to the lower 2/3. And what was completely fascinating for me is I was in Canada when he was presenting this for the first time. And I can't tell you how much I recommend everybody watches that piece he's doing. But what happened was we went up to a salmon farm up on the top of Grouse Mountain in Vancouver, where the presentation was. He was at the first the third Fascia Research Congress. And what they have there are these vast tanks where they breed the salmon. And effectively what happens is there's 4 or 5 foot high glass panels in these tanks, and you can walk along them. I mean, they make aircraft hangars look small to give you a scale. And on the wall, you walk along the wall and there's just millions of tiny baby salmon swimming all the way around these enormous tanks, all the way around you. And you're walking inside this concrete tunnel with just windows in it all the way along. And I just come out of this lecture with Gerald Pollack, and I'm standing there watching these windows. These windows, the water level is above these windows. So we're looking at the fish swimming around us in this direction. And only the lower third was full of fish. There were no fish in the upper 2/3. In the upper part of these tanks of water, there was no fish. And I stood there and I thought, hang on a second. Is what he's saying that the water has a different structure at the top to the bottom of a glass? Then it must be the same in a great big tank. It's just a bigger scale. I thought, okay. And what I began to watch, and wouldn't you imagine this with me? Because think of these fish as your cells. Your cells know the density that's around them. They're sensory perceptive through the structure, through the light, through everything. Is that these fish were massed together in their thousands in this lower zone of the water. And if you watched really carefully, every now and again, a fish would break away from this flow of all the other fish together in so tight you couldn't put your finger between two of them. It would suddenly dart up, and desperately, you could see the effort in this little tiny fish body to get itself up to the surface, and it fought its way up to the surface, and then it would dart back down again and join the flow. I stood watching this for hours. Everybody got fed up and left me there. And I kind of tried to do something JR talks about when he watches fish. I tried to be fish, if this makes any sense. You can call me bonkers, but just anyway. And I realized if that water was denser or more structured above where they're flowing, they know that, they can feel that. And of course, they were going up and coming back down again really quickly because the structure meant it was cleaning them, and they were getting stronger by going up it and coming down it. And as I watched and got sort of into this fish world, I realized that there was a kind of a surface to the flow of fish, and that they were popping up all the way through. As they were swimming, they were darting up through this exclusion zone. So what that means is, officially, the structure of the top water is H3O2 because it's nearer hexagonal. And what's in the bottom is H2O, it's unbound. It means the chemical organization, the structure, is not a closed hexagon. And that gets us into geometry, which we'll do next time. But your whole tissue is a geometric organization of hexagons, basically. So that's the fundamental form of life. So just to give you a sense that this is real within things, and the fish know about it.
Well, yes, if there's any interest, we could do another session called the geometry of life, because I know that would be something that you specialize in, and would be, interesting. And again, we're always looking at like, well, how does that help us move better? How does that help us be healthier? And but also there's a fascination as well with the miracle of life itself, and how we form. What's so interesting to me is I was talking to Mark Holmes, Dr. Mark Holmes, an Oriental medical doctor. Many of you know him. Very, very experienced. He studied in Japan and Korea and China. I mean, all the methodologies, the esoteric Taoist systems. And he says that when you're looking with an acupuncture needle, you're actually looking to find the space in the tissue. And that's actually where you're putting the needle in the space. And again, this is kind of like, it really turns the world upside down, because it's a different approach than we would think of. We're always looking at what's solid, what we can manipulate, right? So I've got a sore arm, massage my arm. It's just like, okay, really, deep tissue, want to go deep tissue massage. And it turns out that that's not, it may feel good because we feel something, but it's not actually honoring the structure of the body and how the body functions. So the idea of the space, and this is the thing about this kind of the space in between, and it's something I'm exploring with Joanne in other classes, but the idea that the space between the tissues, the space is actually connected throughout our whole body. I did want to show this to people who haven't seen it before. If you've done classes with me, you've seen it many, many times. But this is what's called like a tensegrity model, really. And but it does kind of explain things in ways that things can have a structure. We're used to things being stacked together. And this is a model where you can see the wooden dowels. Although this has a lot of structure and is very resilient, I can bounce it off the floor. The wooden dowels are not touching each other. They're connected with these rubber bands. And this is a great metaphor or great example of the fascia in our body. So what we want to get away from is this idea of our body being this stacked system, this mechanistic system, the system of levers. And so this is a very much a living system that is connected by space. And this has so many implications for us. I just want to put that in your heads, because I do feel that sometimes we can get a piece of information and suddenly it just changes our world enough that we start looking at things differently. And that can actually be a huge pathway into our health and well-being. And I did allow 90 minutes because I really felt that an hour wouldn't be enough with both of you, and we could still go on a little bit here. But I would like Joanne just to address this idea that fascia being the in-between, and you mentioned a little bit that the dance was actually in the space between that motion. Can you just speak to that a little bit, and how we could work with that again just to change our mindsets around these areas?
Well, and I think Peter will back me up with this, that the mitochondria need space, or it's a word I made up, spatialization, as well as specialization, in order to function well, in order to vibrate appropriately, in order to send and receive their signals, because a battery can sit there absolutely uselessly if it's in the wrong space and it can't reach and manage what it's connecting. It can't send its current, it can't emit. You can have it absolutely packed full of energy, but if it can't communicate that energy in any way, then the system is got the structural issue. And when we talk about space in the body, it completely fascinates me, because there are no empty spaces in the human body. The human body is full of what's called virtual spaces, because it's full of everywhere there's a something. But one example of this that's one of the simplest things to see is that when the embryo forms, the limbs grow out of the side of the body like little buds, and it starts off fingers first, but it's like that. It's like a paddle, and it emits out from the body and under tension. See, I'm holding on to this because it's attached under tension, and it comes round because of the way the heart is designed originally, and you have a paddle. This is the same for your feet, but they come later. And then what happens is certain cells commit something called cell apoptosis, and you can see the shadow here, which forms these spaces. That's where the cell apoptosis is. So this is actually one paddle with 4 spaces, not 5 fingers. And our ability to spiral and oppose, i.e., this movement. So if everybody does this movement just while you're watching me, it's a very beautiful, gentle, subtle movement. This movement is what distinguishes us from the rest of the animal kingdom. This is the highest level of our nervous system, is our ability to do this, to oppose fingers and thumb. And each one of these is a different electrical circuit in the body. So there's actually a breathing sequence that you can do with this differences. And when you start to look at these 5 or 4 spaces on each hand, and you imagine that everyone here, we all hold up our hands, and we imagine that we're all joined by those spaces. So I'm joined to Peter now. Those spaces are in a continuum. We start to have a very different view of who and what we are, but we want the ability to close and open those spaces, give us the possibility of changing shape, which is what gives us the possibility of creating a channel. We've made a channel. And we can take our hands together in a really lovely soft gesture if we were splashing our faces with water, so water can move through our hands. But if we have a different intention, i.e. we want to drink, we want to stiffen our hands into a cup and join them together and press them so that we can scoop and hold for long enough to drink. So we have this incredible ability to change our structure, to stiffen and soften it, so we can be the floating rods in that model that you just had, Paul, that's held together with the soft bits, or we can be the softer ones that we hold, the inside holds us together. We can change all the time. And this is what's so hard to get our heads around, that we can kind of invert through the spaces. It's called invagination, which is what gives us this incredible movement and power and tubular networking through which the mitochondria can travel, through which the good, the bad, and the ugly stuff of us can travel and differentiate through this process of moving through spaces and moving through forms. And it's mind-blowing when you get into the quantum nature of it, because it's a universe inside. Peter, you mentioned the cosmos and the galaxy. So we've got the microcosmos within every cell. If you go inside that cell, this world, you said thousands of mitochondria in one cell, well, they're like stars within a galaxy inside each cell. So it's on every scale, it's the same. But the principles of bound water, of electromagnetic fields, and of this magical, changeable structure that we call fascia, which is a bit of a odd name for it, because fascia means binding or band. It's what holds us together. It's what also holds things apart at the same time. And it's the communication system. So everything's relying on everything. I don't know if I answered your question, Paul, but
no, but that's brilliant, because I think what you're really emphasizing is this paradoxical nature. It holds things together, but it also holds things apart. And I think that's what's been so difficult for people to grasp. What is this fascial nature? It's similar with the cell. Bruce Lipton's work was revolutionary, because we thought that the brain of the cell was the nucleus, and that was the thinking for so many years. And then Bruce Lipton discovered that actually the intelligence of the cell was found in the cell covering, the cell wall. what surrounded the cell was where the intelligence was. And that again is just like, what? And so then we look at the fascia and we go, well, it's not really the deep tissue that we want to get to. To get the relief, we actually just want to be on the surface. We want to just
communicate through it. You're communicating through it. So, and what the work we've done with the book, if anyone's got any scars or anything, it's called Scars, Adhesions, and the Biotensegrity Body. It's by Jan Trawartha, and I've done 2 chapters in it. I think Leonid Blyum, who works with children with cerebral palsy, so he works with children with a really different structural issue, and he talks about his chapter in that book. I'll put it in the chat. Is all about the craziness, but nevertheless the truth of why the mildest touch with your ring finger has in some cases, a much more powerful effect on the body-wide than the deep tissue manipulation of the elbow, which is what I think you're talking about, Paul. Sometimes there is an adhesion in deep tissue that's in the back of the body and it's stuck. And this elbow, I promise you, is a magical thing. It can get rid of pain. However, there are also times, like scar tissue, for example, where we can transform it using the touch of the ring finger that's so gentle that you can't even, you just, somebody looks at you like, are you crazy? You're not even doing anything, but you so are. And as I think Peter talked about, quantum level, it's all of it, the all and the everything, the all one of it is extraordinary, the micro and the macro. That in fact, the opening part of my book says, if you are not willing to hold paradox in your mind, then forget about understanding fascia, because you'll just get aggravated. And a paradox means when 2 completely opposite ideas are both true simultaneously at the same time. And just to kind of, and I just want to feed this to Peter and see what you think, but John Sharkey calls fascia the tissue of temporality in the body. I think it's the architecture that we, as the architect, construct to express ourselves as the architect. So it's the architecture self-assembles, the architect self-assembles the architecture through which to express the architect.
Yeah,
and you go, yeah.
Yeah, just that, light gets slowed down, it becomes matter. And there are all kinds of time signatures that are wrapped up in making us human in terms of our temporality. And in quantum physics, they discovered something called time crystals, which I've read about them like 6 different ways. I don't understand what they are, but I know that how our cells and at the cell level, we relate to signals from light and to being on a time, being on a timeline with how some things are designed, and just trying to getting in step with nature is a lot about honoring nature's time. And, JR used to talk about in God's time, so what you want is happening in God's time. And that's another way to look at it. And when we're talking about a physical body, nature's time, how do I align and get in sequence with that?
It's so interesting, this idea of nature, because I think we find ourselves getting further and further away from that. Yeah. And one of the greatest things we can do for our stress levels is just to get outside. And if we can surround ourselves with green. I'm in the heart of the city. Fortunately, I'm also a peace awareness labyrinth and garden, so I can, get myself into some greenery. But even, in my home area, it's pretty urban. But, there's always a tree somewhere that one can relate to. There's always, one can cast one's eyes into green and to nature, and to get that connection is so much a part of what we are. And of course, what's the reverse of that is this technology that we're involved in, that I'm enamored with. I'm not anti-technology. I'm sitting in front of my computer. I love what I'm seeing. I love this presentation, the fact that I can communicate with you both. I mean, Peter is in Philadelphia, Joanne is in the south of England, and I'm in Los Angeles, and here we are all together. But I spend hours in front of this screen, and so do many other people, and young people as well, the gamers, the video games, spending their lives, video gaming. I have to think it's impacting us, because what we're seeing is a massive epidemic of mental illness and mental problems. We're finding a lot of suicidal problems as well. The amount of teen suicide is tragic, and of course, this huge amount of drug overdoses that we're seeing as well. The people are having difficulty coping, and I think that a huge part of that will be our disassociation. Number one, from our bodies. We're in our heads. We're not feeling our bodies. We're not into the completeness, and also our disassociation from nature itself. So I would encourage anybody as a health intervention, that idea that Peter started from the beginning, ground. Joanne could do 2 days on the feet. She calls it our ears to the ground, how important that is. There's so much information on the soles of our feet. There's so much, the body has put so much energy into getting information into the bottom of our feet. I think it's the palms, our lips, and the bottom of our feet are the most nerve-dense areas of our body. Yet what do? We shut off this whole area. It's almost like putting blocks over our ears so that we can't hear. I mean, our shoes, we were not letting, I think Joanne mentioned earlier on, about spreading our toes. Letting our toes spread out, letting our bodies and connect with things. So perhaps, that's one of the answers. And everything that Peter has said, which is what I've appreciated, has been, returning to our natural cycles, get out light, and this idea of hydration and water and movement. So hopefully you've been inspired. Many, many kind words. Joanne and Peter can't see the live stream, but I've been, just been looking, and so many kind comments about how much you've appreciated. And I even got a text from a lady, Kate, who said, I can't seem to stop crying as I'm listening to all of you. So certainly being very touched by that, and some many, many kind comments. And also, I want to say that I did post a couple of links that you may be interested in the live stream chat. One of them was for those of you who want more Joanne. She recently did a presentation with Handspring Publishing, who published her book. I watched it yesterday, so I sent the link to that. A lovely presentation. It just says more Joanne, and there's a link to hearing, and she'll go a lot more into the fascia, and some little couple of nice exercises we can do, and a little mudra, hand mudra that she goes into if you're interested there. And also that book Joanne mentioned, I posted that as well, Scars, Adhesions, and the Biotentegral Body. So you can just find the title, and I didn't produce the Amazon link, but you can find that in whatever form you buy books. And it was so interesting that Joanne mentioned architect, because we have a master architect with us, Charles Bernstein, who I'm so glad was watching. He says, what comes to mind listening to this presentation, especially Joanne's geometry of life, are the healing properties of space. And he gives the example of the built works at Saqqara, which is a temple in Egypt, an ancient temple in Egypt. And he said the essential components of space being scale, proportion, and the entrance of light into it. And what a beautiful way to conclude that, and the possibilities and the geometry of space. I would love to actually explore that, and there's something we can talk about. We do these interviews once a month. So next one coming up, I guess I could look at my calendar, a little bit unprepared here, I'm afraid. So let me just see where that's coming up. Is on September.
Can I jump in, Paul? We have to do something. Charles Bernstein, I love you. Hello, and we have to do something on the labyrinth and the light coming through Chatra, and because the labyrinth is the metaphor for how we self-assemble. So please.
Okay. Well, that's something to look forward to. The next one is September 25th. So if you love labyrinths and light and space and how that can impact our health in huge ways, and we'll have Peter Bort back with us at that point as well. I mean, just a wonderful, positive presence. Peter, I love your energy. You embody what you've been telling us. Can't thank you enough for just shining your light on all of this. And Joanne, huge thanks to you for sharing all of your knowledge with us so freely and openly. I want to thank Stella for hosting, Maria Jose Marignon for translating all that we've been saying. I mean, fortunately, we were just blessed to have Maria Jose Marignon. She's a biochemist, and she understands what we're talking about. So not only is she a master translator, but actually can understand the words and translate them as well. So we're blessed with that. Paul Wilcox has been amazing today. Total flexibility. Our sound technician, really appreciate that. Julie Lurie helping us behind the scenes as well. Takes a village to put these on. Thank you for your kind comments, and in the chat room, please check out the chat room and see what you can find in there and some of the links. And we covered a lot of ground here, which is exactly what I hope to do. Stimulated you, hopefully, and it's something we can continue with. So please let me know your comments, and we'll take it from there. God bless you all, and thank you for joining us and making this a really special event. Thank you again, Joanne and Peter. God bless you all.